Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Today we're jumping into, well, quite a stack of sources, actually. They tackle a really unsettling real-world mystery.
Yeah, one that's been impacting U.S. national security professionals all over the globe.
Exactly. Think diplomats, intelligence officers, military folks. The topic, it's Havana Syndrome.
And the really chilling possibility of directed energy attacks being involved.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
What started, as these weird reports in Havana, it's just ballooned.
It really has. It's become this widespread phenomenon, and the sources really highlight the devastating personal consequences.
So our mission today, with this deep dive, is to sort of comb through all this material you've given us.
Yeah, try to figure out what we actually know, what's strongly suspected, and maybe most importantly, understand the human cost.
The impact on the people really caught in the middle of this.
Exactly. It's a story that, as you'll see, stretches way beyond where it started, geographically speaking, and involves some really tough personal struggles.
Absolutely. So let's set the scene. Where did this first crop up?
The sources point to 2016, right? Havana, Cuba, U.S. Embassy staff.
That's the starting point, yeah. And I think for a while, maybe people thought, okay, it's a Cuba thing.
Right, localized.
But the sources, they make it really clear it didn't stay localized at all. It spread significantly.
Okay, so where else are we talking about?
Well, the list is pretty extensive. We've got documented incidents reported in places like Russia, Germany, China, England, Austria, India.
Wow.
Across Latin America, and yeah, even here in the U.S., Philadelphia, Washington, D.C.
Even inside the White House grounds, the sources mentioned.
That's right. So truly global.
It really drives home that this isn't just one isolated incident. So those initial experiences, U.S. intel officers, diplomats, Canadian staff too, sometimes they reported hearing something like a high-pitched sound or feeling pressure.
Yes, but, and this is crucial from the sources, that wasn't always the case. Not everyone heard or felt something specific like that first. Okay, so the trigger wasn't consistent, but the after effects were.
That seems to be the pattern. The injuries that followed, those were consistent and often severe.
And we're not talking just feeling a bit unwell.
No. The sources detail really debilitating symptoms, physical, cognitive, things like sudden, stunning vertigo.
Like the world just tilted.
Exactly. Terrible tinnitus, that constant ringing, splitting headaches, just overwhelming physical sickness.
There was one story in the sources, really stark, about a colleague losing eyesight.
Yeah, that one was powerful. Blind in one eye now, needs a weighted vest just to manage balance, uses a service dog.
That's profound. A life completely changed by whatever this is.
Absolutely. And the personal account from the former CIA officer, the one featured heavily in these sources, it's incredibly vivid.
His incident was in Moscow, right? 2017.
That's right. He describes waking up middle of the night, didn't hear anything specific, which is interesting, but bam, instantly hit with just staggering vertigo, room spinning, the intense tinnitus, a splitting headache, feeling incredibly sick.
And he wasn't alone on that trip, was he?
No. A colleague traveling with him was also affected, ended up losing hearing in one ear.
So multiple people, same place, same time frame.
And when the main officer got back home, his condition didn't get better. It got worse.
How so?
He talks about these crippling headaches every single day. By March 2018, so just a few months later, his long-distance vision was gone, couldn't drive anymore.
Wow.
And terrible cognitive issues, really bad brain fog. He put it bluntly in the source material.
What did he say?
He said, I was fucked up.
Direct. And the impact wasn't just on him, right? The sources mention families.
Yes, that's another devastating layer. It mentions family members being affected too. One really heartbreaking example. A young child diagnosed with a permanent traumatic brain injury linked to one of these incidents.
Oh my God, so it's not just the individual targeted? It's collateral damage to their loved ones.
Exactly. It affects the whole family unit.
So you've got this well-regarded senior CIA officer coming home with these awful escalating symptoms. What happens when he goes to the agency for help?
Well, this is where the story gets really, really frustrating. And frankly, it points to a major breakdown.
How so?
He went straight to the CIA's medical staff, explained everything. Moscow, the symptoms, pointed out the similarities to the Havana reports that were emerging.
Okay.
And he says he was just dismissed.
With symptoms like vertigo, vision loss, cognitive fog.
Yep. According to his account, a big part of the reason was precisely because he didn't report hearing a specific sound when it happened in Moscow.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Because it didn't fit the initial Havana profile.
Apparently so. It seems like they had this narrow checklist based on the very first reports, and if you didn't tick that box, well, tough luck, basically, even as his condition was clearly worsening, making it almost impossible for him to do his very senior job.
So he's suffering, getting worse, can barely work, and his own medical team is essentially saying, doesn't fit the pattern.
That's the picture painted in the sources. He was desperate. So what does he do? He starts looking for answers outside the agency.
Right.
Sees tons of doctors, neurologists, infectious disease specialists, allergists, had multiple MRIs done.
Any breakthroughs?
No. Nobody could pinpoint what was wrong. But he was obviously impaired, right? Could only manage maybe 2 or 3 hours of work a day.
So he's stuck.
Totally stuck. And he describes pleading with the agency, specifically the operations leadership, saying, look, send me to the specialist, send me to UPenn where some Havana folks went.
Makes sense.
But the Office of Medical Services, according to him, just kept saying no. Rejected the requests repeatedly.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare. Knowing something's wrong, being incapacitated, and the people who should be helping you are just blocking you.
It does. He calls it a really terrible tale of incompetence in the source. And he brings up this basic leadership idea, right?
Which is?
If someone under your command is hurt, your first job is to get them care. Period. You don't argue about the how or why first, you just get them help.
But that didn't happen here, according to him.
Apparently not. The focus seemed to be on whether it fit the exact profile, not on the fact that he was clearly severely injured.
And this ultimately forced him out of his career.
Tragically, yes. The symptoms were just too debilitating. He was actually offered a huge promotion, ADDO, potentially one of the top operations jobs there is.
Wow.
But he had to retire prematurely. Early spring 2019. The sources are clear. This wasn't some disgruntled guy looking for an exit. He was highly regarded. His health just made the job impossible.
So retirement happens, but the health problems persist. And he's still not getting access to places like Walter Reed, even though others are starting to.
Exactly. His condition actually worsened after he retired. His informal requests for that specialized care kept getting denied.
What finally pushes him over the edge to go public? That seems like a massive step for a career intel officer.
It was seeing others, some with similar Russia backgrounds, finally getting into Walter Reed while he was still shut out. That was the last straw. So October 2020, he makes this incredibly difficult call. He reaches out to a journalist, Julie E. ATHI, someone he knew as a Russia expert and felt he could trust.
Must have felt like betraying his entire career ethos.
Immense pressure, absolutely. He said his motivation was very specific. He felt going public was the only leverage he had left to force the agency to send him to Walter Reed.
A desperate measure.
Totally. He knew it meant, as he put it, a public fight with CIA, completely alien after 26 years working in the shadows.
And the sources described the fallout as pretty brutal.
Oh, devastating. Personally devastating. He talks about intense blowback. Colleagues, friends, suddenly silent.
Why?
He believes many were basically told by the 7th floor, agency leadership, don't talk to him.
Ouch.
Yeah. So profound feelings of betrayal, being shunned by people he'd trusted with his life for decades.
That kind of isolation piled on top of the physical pain, the cognitive struggles, the mental health impact must have been enormous.
Terrible. He describes himself when he finally did get to Walter Reed in January 2021. He said he was a mess.
Understandably.
It wasn't just the physical stuff. It was this deep moral injury, that feeling of being abandoned, betrayed by the institution and the people he dedicated everything to.
But he did finally make it to Walter Reed. So the public pressure worked, eventually.
It seems it contributed, yeah. After some initial diversions, like being sent to an NIH research study he found useless for actual treatment, the agency relented.
And he got into NICO. The TBI Center.
Yes, the National Intrepid Center of Excellence.
Yeah.
NICO, finally.
And what was that like? Was it the validation he'd been searching for?
Absolutely. He describes NICO as this world-class place, treated thousands of veterans with TBIs and the doctors there. He says they had no doubt that something has happened to us.
After years of being dismissed, hearing that must have been huge.
Groundbreaking for him, yeah. They gave him a clear diagnosis. Traumatic brain injury, a TBI from an external exposure event.
Official validation.
He talks about having tears in his eyes. Finally, after years of agency doctors basically saying, we don't see it, the top TBI experts were saying, yes, This is real.
And did those Walter Reed doctors mince words when talking to the higher-ups?
Not according to the source. When people like CIA Director Burns and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan visited Nina Ko, the doctors were blunt.
What did they say?
They basically said, TBI doesn't get better with time sitting on the shelf. It took you 4 years to get Mark here. That's unconscionable.
Strong words.
Very. And they issued a really chilling warning, too.
About suicides.
Yeah. They warned that the delays in care, the feeling of abandonment, it could potentially lead to a rash of suicides among affected officers.
Oh, that's sobering.
It really is. Thankfully, Walter Reed provided comprehensive care, mental health support, physical therapies, everything. The response seems to have improved since those early failures, but the initial delays, they clearly had severe consequences.
Let's talk about this idea of the silent injury. That seems central to why this was so hard for people to grasp.
It's absolutely crucial you've got these real brain injuries, but they often don't show up clearly on standard scans, especially early on. There's no visible wound like, a bullet hole or a broken bone.
Right. Nothing obvious to point to.
Exactly. Which makes it incredibly hard to prove to people who don't understand the nature of this kind of trauma. It breeds disbelief, skepticism.
There's that really powerful story about the art therapy masks at NIG.
Yes, that illustrates it perfectly. Patients make these masks, right? And the former CIA officer, his mask.
What was it like?
Painted like Superman on one side, how his kids saw him, before all this. But then an ice pick sticking through it, symbolizing the constant splitting headaches.
Visceral.
But the kicker was this piece of wood he carved with the CIA seal, cracked right in half.
Yeah.
And he put that on the mask, representing that deep sense of betrayal by the agency.
And they actually show this mask to visiting officials.
They do. It hangs there at NSCO. They show it to Burns, Sullivan. It's become the symbol of the silent injury and how these victims felt treated. The physical agony mixed with being cast aside.
It really highlights that sense of humiliation the sources talk about, that awful quote, "I wish I was shot."
Exactly. Because a visible wound, everyone understands that. It's believed instantly. There's no questioning it. But this invisible damage, it forces victims to constantly justify their suffering.
And this isn't unique to Havana Syndrome victims,
Yeah.
right? But NSCO treats others with similar issues.
Right. The sources mention the parallels with special operations folks treated there for TBIs after decades of war. These are tough, resilient people, but they face the same struggle, debilitating injuries that others can't see, making it hard to get understanding and support.
Okay, so if we accept these are TBIs from an external exposure event, what do the sources suggest is the actual cause? And who's potentially responsible? Well, the U.S. government hasn't officially pointed fingers or named the weapon definitively in public, but
Among the affected people, and some experts cited in the sources, there's a very strong suspicion. It points towards directed energy.
like microwaves.
Possibly microwave technology, yeah.
Yeah.
That seems to be the leading theory.
What's the evidence for that?
According to the sources, a panel of experts convened by the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, concluded it was likely a directed energy attack.
Okay.
They apparently described it as scary shit because this kind of energy goes through glass, goes through walls, goes through buildings.
Which would explain how people were affected inside embassies, homes, hotel rooms.
Exactly. It fits the circumstances of many incidents.
And when it comes to who might be doing this, Russia's name comes up a lot of these materials.
It does. There are several threads pointing that way.
Such as?
Well, first, the sources mention known Russian expertise in this area. They've openly admitted, apparently, to dabbling in microwave weapons. That's out there in open source info.
Okay, capability. What about targeting?
The targets are overwhelmingly U.S. government personnel. Diplomats, intel officers, and notably many, like the former CIA officer in the main source, had specific experience related to Russia.
That seems significant. What about motive? Why would Russia do this?
The thinking, as laid out in the sources, is that it fits into a kind of hybrid warfare strategy.
How so?
You use these unconventional weapons to injure or incapacitate experienced U.S. personnel. It degrades U.S. capability, causes disruption, fear. But it's deniable.
Hard to prove definitively who fired the weapon or even that a weapon was fired.
Exactly. It creates chaos and harms your adversary without triggering a traditional military response because attribution is so difficult. Makes strategic sense from a certain point of view.
Is there anything more concrete linking Russia?
The sources mention U.S. intelligence investigations. These apparently found correlations between the travel patterns of known Russian intelligence operatives and the specific times and places where U.S. officers reported being hit.
So GRU agents showing up in a city around the same time a CIA officer experiences an incident there.
That's the implication. The GQ article cited calls it a pretty damn strong circumstantial case. And you have figures like Senator Collins calling it an act of war.
So the circumstantial evidence is leaning towards Russia. Do the sources mention anyone else? China.
Yes, the possibility is acknowledged. China is mentioned as another potential actor with advanced capabilities, maybe acting with Russia, maybe independently. Cuba, too, given the origin.
But the main thrust points to Moscow.
Based on the specific accounts and analysis presented in these sources, yes, Russia seems the most likely culprit. And the former officer is adamant. He believes it did not come from inside the U.S. government.
Are there still big unanswered questions like why haven't we heard about allies like the British being hit in the same way?
Yeah, that's a point the sources touch on. It's presented as one of the lingering mysteries, why primarily U.S. and Canadian personnel. It's not fully explained in the material we have here. It adds complexity, but doesn't necessarily derail the main theory presented.
Despite all the initial struggles, the disbelief, the delays, it does sound like advocacy made a real difference eventually.
It seems so. The former officer going public, for instance, is framed as a key factor. It brought attention, forced the issue onto the agenda.
And that helped lead to actual legislation.
Correct. It was part of the momentum that led to the Havana Act. Bipartisan support signed into law.
What does the act do?
Its main goal is to provide financial compensation and support for affected personnel and their families. The source notes it's perhaps more critical for, say, junior officers or staff who don't have the same resources he might have had.
And the bipartisan aspect is interesting.
Yeah, the sources highlight that. You had people like Devin Nunes and Adam Schiff, often on opposite sides, agreeing on the need to act here, shows the perceived seriousness of the issue across the political spectrum.
Managing these symptoms, the chronic pain, the cognitive issues, sounds like a daily battle. Are treatments helping?
It's definitely portrayed as an ongoing fight. The source mentions he's pursuing experimental treatments. One is called MERT, or TMS. It's a magnetic therapy.
Yeah, that helps.
He describes it as life-changing for his headaches. Apparently, Walter Reed doctors found it plausible, relating it to potentially altered brainwave patterns from the injury.
Any other potential treatments mentioned?
There's a brief mention of potential interest in psychedelics, something Walter Reed is reportedly looking into for other conditions like PTSD and TBI. But the magnetic therapy seems to be the main experimental one he found helpful.
Beyond the physical, there's that huge psychological component, especially the feeling of betrayal. How is he dealing with that?
That's a big part of the healing journey described. He talks about getting crucial help from a Marine Corps chaplain at Walter Reed.
What kind of help?
Teaching him about forgiveness, not in the sense of excusing what happened or what the agency or colleagues did,
Right.
but forgiveness as a tool for himself, to release the anger, the bitterness for his own health and well-being, to be able to move forward.
That's a tough process, I imagine.
Incredibly tough. And the sources make clear, even with therapy and treatments, the pain isn't just gone, it's constant.
Yeah.
It's this perpetual search for relief. He mentions the real risk of addiction that comes with chronic pain, people turning to opioids just to cope. His journey is about managing that pain, healing mentally, finding a new purpose. He mentions leadership talks, baseball, while still processing that deep betrayal.
It's quite a story. He even mentions people who shunned him are now getting back in touch.
Yeah, a bit of irony there. Notes that since the Havana Act passed and the issue got more official recognition, some of the same people who cut him off are now calling again.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, looking back across all these sources, what are the main things you should take away?
I think, first, the sources argue forcefully that Havana Syndrome is real. It's causing serious TBI-like injuries, it's widespread, and it's affecting U.S. personnel and their families significantly. It's not just psychosomatic.
Okay.
Second, there's heavy criticism of the initial government response, particularly the medical side's handling of early cases, and conversely, the importance of advocacy in places like Walter Reed's NACO, and finally getting people proper diagnosis and care.
Right, and the cause.
Third takeaway. A strong suspicion, based on the evidence presented, points towards directed energy weapons. Microwaves, perhaps. And Russia is flagged as the most likely state actor behind it, using it as a strategic, deniable tactic.
And finally, the human element.
Yeah, perhaps the most crucial takeaway, the profound human cost. The struggle, the pain, the unique psychological burden of carrying a silent injury, something real and debilitating that others can't see and struggle to believe.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, it's clear Havana Syndrome is, well, it's Incredibly complex geopolitics, hidden weapons, medical mysteries.
And intensely personal battles. What these sources really illuminate isn't just the clinical reality of these suspected attacks, but that huge human struggle. Getting acknowledged, getting diagnosed, trying to heal within systems that just weren't equipped to understand this initially.
It's definitely a story of resilience, but also highlights how incredibly difficult it is to confront a threat that, doesn't leave fingerprints.
Exactly. Which leads to a final thought, something for you to chew on, drawn from these sources. If it is possible for adversaries to inflict these kinds of serious, debilitating brain injuries on national security professionals, potentially using directed energy, without leaving obvious forensic proof, what does that really mean for the future? How do you protect people from weapons you can't easily see or trace? What does it mean for global competition, for espionage, for the safety of personnel serving overseas or even at home?
If you enjoyed this episode of While We Were Distracted, be sure to watch the video that inspired it. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.